Over the past couple of weeks, I have been struck that there has been no greater ally to alt tech than big tech themselves. And this is, of course, entirely inadvertent, though it is due entirely to their purposeful actions. Over the past couple of weeks, it has become entirely clear that to steal a rhyme from Razorfist, it doesn't take Rumble, Brighteon, Odyssey, BitChute, any of the alt-tech platforms to succeed in order for YouTube or any of the big tech platforms to fail. And this has been no better seen than by YouTube removing dislikes, and a move which was immediately criticized by quite literally everyone, from every creator under the sun to even one of YouTube's co-founders in the description of the very first YouTube video which was ever posted. This is a far and widespread backlash, and it was something that they could have walked back on. They could have said that that was a mistake, obviously we went too far in this and we shouldn't have done what we did, and so we're sorry, we'll move back on that and not remove dislikes. But that's not what they did. Instead, they barreled forward with the completely brain-dead idea of removing dislikes simply because, well, probably the White House told them to, though don't quote me on that. That's just idle speculation on my part. But they did go through with it, and now, for most people at the very least, dislikes are no longer seen on YouTube, unless you installed one of the extensions, which makes it so the dislikes came back, which I did personally. And it must be said that this move is utterly moronic. There is nothing that they could do or that any alt-tech platform could do to try and overtake YouTube, which would have anywhere near the impact of YouTube completely destroying their platform all by their lonesome. And this goes not only for YouTube, but also for other social media platforms, most pressingly and most recently being Twitter, because in case you haven't heard, Jack Dorsey quit, and that was a great surprise to everyone, and everyone was very happy for a couple of minutes there. I mean, they had their stocks boost up for about 2.5 whole seconds before everyone realized who the new guy was, who it turns out was even worse than Jack Dorsey, because you know how Jack Dorsey would make mea culpas to free speech, and every single time people talked to him about censorship, he would play the high as a kite route and pretend that he knew nothing about what was going on in his own company. Yeah, well, this guy takes off the mask entirely. He's not interested in the First Amendment whatsoever. In fact, he says that we need to think past free speech and think about how we're going to deal with misinformation, a term which he admittedly cannot define. It was quite a funny situation to see, and once all that was revealed, the stock immediately went back down to below when Jack Dorsey was CEO. It was quite the saga to behold, and it manifested quite quickly, because just a day after the new Twitter CEO was announced, you ended up getting a new Twitter policy which said that any videos or images which post private persons without their express consent can be removed for violating this new policy, which I hope I don't have to explain in full exactly how disastrous that's going to be as soon as it gets implemented, which it's kind of being generous to say it would be implemented at all, because this rule is so broad and ill-defined that you couldn't possibly ever establish a consistent rule for it, because how are we making the standard here? If I am filming on the street, on a completely public street of my own face, if I'm walking down the street doing political commentary or anything to that effect, and I just so happen to catch people in the background who didn't consent to me filming them but are on the street and whatnot, can they have my tweet removed? Is Twitter going to remove that? Well, I don't know. Are they going to remove videos of protests? Any protests that are just public protests that are going on? But if there's private individuals involved, which with most protests I would imagine there are, unless they're fake protests, in which case you might have a bit more of an argument there for the idea that they're all public. But what in all reality is going to end up happening is that the enforcement here is going to be incredibly inconsistent, and it's going to essentially be, if we don't like your video and it has private individuals in it, which most videos likely will, we'll just remove it, and we'll just remove it without even having to ask those said people. Whereas if the New York Times can just dox people and then it'll be totally fine. I mean, I guess the argument here is that, well, having someone's face on the internet is doxing. When no, it really isn't. Especially if I'm filming in a public place in a state in which it is perfectly legal to do so, which is most states for public areas. It's just kind of silly, and this is not something that's going to help the company. I don't think it's helped their stock prices any, certainly, and Twitter stock prices have been in the tank for years at this point. It's probably not going to help their user base either, as most people are about 1 to 2 steps away from leaving Twitter altogether. And by the way, if you're still on Twitter and still actively using it for anything other than browsing for news stories, which I do, because frankly, it's the most convenient place to do that still, I suggest to get out of it, delete your Twitter account, maybe don't delete your Twitter account, I don't care, just stop using it, and that goes for YouTube too. Fundamentally, even if the big tech platforms shoot themselves figuratively in the literal face and end up completely neutering their platforms, nothing is going to fundamentally change if you don't stop using them. Now, I still kind of use YouTube, and that's still going to be the case because there's still going to be people on YouTube who aren't on the alt-tech platforms that I still want to watch, and so that I'll still do. But if there's ever a reason to use a platform, if they are on another platform, I'm going to be using that. And the same goes for Twitter. If I can find an alternative to using Twitter, I'm going to use that alternative. And I'm not suggesting that you do anything drastic or that you completely change everything, but at least shift it over. At least for your own personal posting, change it over to Minds. Change it over to Parler. Change it over to Getter. Change it over to Gab for all I care. Change it over to something else. And same goes for YouTube. I'm not saying don't upload on YouTube. That's still a useful thing to do. I still do it, certainly. But upload everywhere else. And I do that as well. And if you want to see me do that, all of those links are down in the description. I have those links in every single video. So if you're on YouTube, go and check out those other platforms. I know I put out the YouTube link generally for these videos on places like Gab and Parler and all that sort of stuff, and I do that every day, and those links are down in the description as well, so I suggest you go check all of those out. I'm KelKidman, this has been Breaking on the Daily, and I'm out.